Captain Vexen stared at the ancient alien temple with the same expression his crew usually reserved for a malfunctioning toilet. "Well," he said, scratching the stubble on his chin, "this place looks like it was designed by someone who thought too many skulls was a decorating theme." The temple loomed ahead, a hulking mass of alien architecture that seemed carved straight out of the nightmares of an interstellar goth. It was dedicated to the wormhole, they said, but Vexen wasn't sure if that was a tribute or a warning. Behind him, First Mate Drax snorted, his helmet communicator crackling. "I've seen better places at the bottom of a bottle." His voice was like gravel in a blender, a fitting match for his personality. "Stay focused," Vexen replied, more out of habit than expectation. This wasn't exactly the first time they'd trudged through an ancient relic. "Remember, we're here for the wormhole, not the souvenirs." Drax kicked at a loose stone. "Wouldn't mind a souvenir that doesn't try to eat you for once." The rest of the team, a motley crew of misfits and grizzled veterans, followed in their wake. They had names like Bones, Sparks, and Jinx, names that suggested colorful pasts or really unfortunate accidents. "Who's betting this place is booby-trapped?" Jinx asked, her voice bright with that special kind of optimism only found in people who hadn't yet been hit by the universe's infinite supply of gotchas. "We're not betting," Vexen said, sidestepping what might have been a pressure plate. "We're trying to survive." They stepped inside the temple, the air cold and heavy, like stepping into a freezer full of suspicion and bad intentions. The walls were etched with alien runes that glowed faintly, casting eerie reflections on the team's armor. "I hate it when the decor glows," Sparks muttered. "Means it's either gonna kill us or make us wish it did." "Probably both," said Bones, the team's medic. "I'm getting a weird energy reading." "Define weird," Vexen said, knowing full well he probably didn't want to know. "Weird as in this will definitely screw with your day weird," Bones clarified, fiddling with his scanner. "The wormhole's energies are shifting." "Great," Vexen said, trying to sound more enthusiastic than he felt. "Just what we needed." A temperamental cosmic anomaly. As they moved deeper into the temple, the air hummed with an unsettling resonance that made their teeth itch. The source, of course, was the wormhole itself, a swirling mass of impossibility hanging in the center of a vast chamber, like the universe's worst migraine come to life. "You ever see something so pretty you want to punch it?" Drax asked, gazing at the wormhole. "Only every time I look in the mirror," Jinx replied. "Enough flirting," Vexen said, waving them forward. "Let's figure out what's gone wrong." They approached the control pedestal, a slab of alien technology that looked like it had been designed by a committee of sadistic architects. The symbols pulsated with an arcane rhythm that suggested someone was either trying to communicate or cast a really elaborate spell. "Bones, see if you can make sense of this," Vexen said, gesturing at the pedestal. Bones poked at the controls, his expression suggesting he was trying to defuse a bomb with a spoon. "I think it's altered the time flow." "Define altered," Drax said, sounding dangerously intrigued. "Think time loop on the fritz," Bones replied, "or a clock trying to eat itself." "Oh joy," Sparks said. "A time rift." Just what I needed to make my existential crisis complete. Vexen sighed, rubbing his forehead. He could feel a headache forming, the kind that only a confrontation with the universe's bizarre underbelly could produce. "All right, let's not panic. Yet, Captain," Jinx said, her voice suddenly serious. "We've got company." The temple's guardians, or as Vexen liked to call them, the unfriendlies, had arrived. They drifted into the chamber like ghostly reflections, their forms shimmering with a not quite real quality. Their eyes, if they could be called that, glowed with suspicion. "Guess they don't like uninvited guests," Drax said, hefting his weapon. "And here I was thinking we could have a nice chat over tea," Vexen replied, raising his own gun. "They don't look chatty," Jinx said, backing up. "Or tea-friendly." The guardians moved, surrounding them with the slow inevitability of a bad hangover. Vexen assessed their odds, which looked about as promising as a snowball's in a supernova. "All right, team," Vexen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Plan A, we get out of here without dying. Plan B, improvise." "What's Plan C?" Sparks asked, already checking his ammo. "Try not to think about it," Vexen replied, as the first shot rang out, echoing like a death knell through the chamber. The team scattered, taking cover behind alien pillars that looked slightly more solid than their prospects. Vexen fired back, his shots scattering off the Guardians' energy shields like pebbles on a pond. "I'm open to suggestions," he shouted, ducking as a return shot sizzled overhead. "How about run like hell?" Drax suggested, already doing just that. "Works for me," Vexen agreed, following suit. The rest of the team fell in behind, a ragtag group of desperate souls doing their best to outrun their own bad decisions. They sprinted through the temple, the alien architecture blurring around them in a haze of panic and adrenaline. Behind them the Guardians pursued, relentless as taxes and just as merciless. "I see daylight," Jinx yelled, gesturing ahead. "For once I'm thrilled to see the sun," Vexen replied, pushing himself faster. The exit loomed ahead, a gaping portal to freedom, or at least the next chapter of misery. They burst through, stumbling into the harsh light of the alien sun, their breaths ragged but victorious. "Looks like we made it," Drax wheezed, leaning on his knees. "Barely." "Yeah, but what now?" Sparks asked, glancing back at the temple. "We've got a whirling time mess and a bunch of pissed-off Guardians." "Now," Vexen said, standing tall despite the weight of uncertainty on his shoulders, "we figure out how to fix it, or die trying." "I'd prefer option 1, Bones remarked dryly. "Option 2's lost its charm." "No one's dying today," Vexen said firmly, hoping desperately he wasn't lying. "Let's regroup and come up with a plan." "And by plan you mean wild stab in the dark?" Jinx asked, ever the realist. "Exactly," Vexen said, unable to suppress a grim smile. "The best kind of plan." The team gathered around him, a collection of weary faces made more resolute by their shared plight. They had a problem with time itself and a group of alien Guardians gunning for their heads, but they also had each other. "All right, folks," Vexen said, staring up at the sky painted in shades of impending doom. "Let's get to work. We've got a universe to save, and maybe, just maybe, they'd make it out in one piece, or in several smaller, more manageable pieces. Either way, it was bound to be a hell of a ride." The crew stood outside the alien temple, catching their breath and trading grim jokes about who looked the most likely to drop dead first. The sun was a harsh, indifferent eye in the sky, reminding them of the countless ways space could screw you over with a smile. Vexen was contemplating the odds of dying from a stress-induced heart attack versus being vaporized by an alien when a peculiar sensation rippled through the air. It was as if reality itself had hiccuped, and in the next moment the temple vomited forth an anachronism, a group of heavily armored figures, looking hilariously out of place yet unmistakably human. "What the hell is this?" Drax barked, his weapon aimed at the newcomers who seemed just as bewildered as they were. The figures were clad in ornate armor, the kind that screamed, "I'm impractical but damn impressive." Their leader, a burly man whose beard seemed to have its own gravitational field, squinted at them through a helmet slit. It was the kind of look you'd give someone who just told you they were your long-lost aunt from Mars. Greetings," Vexen ventured, lowering his weapon slightly. "I'm Captain Vexen, and you've just crash-landed in the middle of a really bad day." The bearded leader stepped forward, his armor clanking in a way that suggested maintenance wasn't part of his morning routine. "I am King Hrothgar," he declared in a voice loud enough to be heard on the other side of the galaxy. "Where is this place, and why does it stink of sorcery?" "Welcome to the galaxy's worst tourist trap," Vexen replied. "And as for the sorcery smell, that's just burnt toast and existential dread." Hrothgar's men murmured among themselves, glancing warily at the temple and then at the crew, clearly having their own what-the-hell moment. "Captain," Jinx whispered, nudging Vexen, "these guys look like they've stepped out of a history book or a bad Viking cosplay." Vexen sighed. "Time rift," he guessed, rubbing his temples where the headache throbbed like an unwelcome groupie. "The wormhole must have yanked them out from some forgotten corner of Earth's past." "Fantastic," Sparks muttered, eyeing the newcomers with skepticism. Just what we needed, a dose of medieval machismo while we're trying to fix the universe. Before Vexen could form a reply, the temple guardians reappeared, drifting towards them with all the friendliness of a debt collector at Christmas. Their spectral forms shimmered with menace, apparently unimpressed by the sudden influx of historically significant peasantry. "Ah, crap," Drax muttered, shouldering his weapon again. "Looks like the unfriendlies want a round two." Hrothgar squinted at the approaching guardians, raising his sword with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for pub brawls and tax evasion. "Demons," he roared, "prepare to meet your doom." "Whoa, hold your horses," Vexen said, stepping in front of the would-be medieval hero. "These aren't demons, just sentient energy beings who don't like visitors. Probably allergic to them." Hrothgar paused mid-charge, his expression one of cautious bewilderment. "You speak of magic as if it were common," he said, suspicion thick in his tone. "Trust me, it's more common than I'd like," Vexen replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, we're all in this mess together. How about we put the sword swinging on hold and try not to get each other killed?" The guardians halted at the temple's threshold, seemingly confused by the presence of the anachronistic warriors. Their glowing eyes flickered as if considering their next move, or perhaps trying to figure out if this was some kind of elaborate prank. "Captain," Bones said, sidling over, "we might have a chance to talk this out. If they think we're not a threat, they might back off." Hrothgar snorted, unimpressed. "I do not parley with shades and phantoms." "Right, because that's worked out so well for you so far," Drax said, rolling his eyes. Vexen took a deep breath, hoping for inspiration, or at least a sign from the universe that his efforts wouldn't end with everyone as interstellar dust. Maybe if we, the universe, ever the prankster, chose that moment to interfere. The time rift pulsed again, casting a ripple through the scene. The guardians visibly reacted, their forms flickering like a bad hologram. "We're out of time," Sparks said, a note of urgency in his voice. Literally. The guardians started to advance again, their hesitation turning to determination as they resumed their march. The crew and their new old friends found themselves in an impromptu alliance, bound by the common goal of not dying horrifically. "All right," Vexen said, raising his voice over the rising hum of the temple. "Focus on the rift. If we can stabilize it, maybe we can stop the guardians and send our new friends where they belong." Hrothgar seemed to catch the drift, rallying his men with the kind of enthusiasm normally reserved for looting. "To arms, my warriors! We shall conquer the sorcery of this place. Or die trying," Drax added dryly, checking his weapon with a resigned sigh. With a shared, albeit reluctant, understanding, the humans and the time-displaced warriors charged towards the temple. The air crackled with tension, and the approach of the guardians was a constant backdrop, like an ominous drumbeat. Inside the temple, the rift was a swirling vortex of chaos, its energies lashing out like cosmic whips. Bones was already at the control pedestal, his hands dancing over the alien technology like a conductor trying to bring a symphony of destruction to heel. "Captain, I could use a hand here," Bones yelled, his voice a mix of concentration and panic. "On it," Vexen replied, pushing through the chaos to reach the controls. The symbols glowed with a frantic rhythm, and working them was like trying to defuse a bomb with instructions in a language you'd only seen on cereal boxes. Sparks, meanwhile, took up a defensive position, firing shots at the guardians to keep them at bay. "I don't suppose anyone's got a manual for this thing," he shouted over the din. "Manuals are for the weak," Drax shot back, covering the others with suppressive fire. "Real men improvise. Real men also end up dead," Jinx quipped, watching the warriors battle the guardians with a kind of bemused fascination. The room vibrated with the energy of the conflict, the air thick with the smell of ozone and desperation. The guardians pressed forward with relentless determination, seemingly unfazed by the ragged band of humans and their new allies. Hrothgar was in his element, swinging his sword with a kind of reckless abandon that suggested he'd missed his calling as a demolition expert. His warriors followed his lead, their battle cries mixing with the alien hum like the world's most dysfunctional orchestra. "Vexen, whatever you're doing, do it faster," Sparks shouted, reloading his weapon with a grimace. Vexen gritted his teeth, feeling the pressure of both time and his own inadequacy. Every second felt like a ticking bomb, the rift pulsing with a rhythm that promised disaster if left unchecked. Beside him, Bones was muttering to himself, his fingers dancing over the controls like a pianist playing a particularly vindictive tune. "Almost got it," he said through clenched teeth, his forehead slick with sweat. The Guardians were nearly upon them, their forms shimmering with an intensity that suggested the end was nigh for anyone caught in their path. The crew and the warriors fought with the desperation of those who knew they were outmatched, buying precious moments with sheer tenacity. Come on, Vexen muttered, his fingers moving with a combination of instinct and blind hope. The rift flared, its energies seeming to shift in response to their efforts. Then, with a final, almost reluctant whine, the rift stabilized. The pulsing chaos settled into a more manageable swirl, the energies aligning in a way that suggested, at least for now, they wouldn't all be reduced to cosmic confetti. The Guardians paused, their forms flickering as if unsure whether to advance or retreat. The balance had shifted, and for a moment the universe held its breath. "Looks like we did it," Bones said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "The rift's holding steady." "That's one for the history books," Vexen replied, letting out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Assuming we live long enough to write one." Hrothgar and his men lowered their weapons, their battle lust tempered by the sight of the now calm rift. The Guardians, sensing the change, began to disperse, their forms fading into the ether like a bad dream. "Well, that was something," Jinx said, her voice a mix of awe and exhaustion. Vexen turned to Hrothgar, nodding towards the rift. "Looks like this is your ticket home." The Warrior King regarded the swirling portal with a mix of suspicion and curiosity. "You have our thanks, strange one," he said, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "Though I still don't trust your magic." Vexen chuckled, the sound more tired than amused. "Trust me, neither do I." With a nod, Hrothgar and his men stepped towards the rift, their forms swallowed by the temporal vortex. The last thing Vexen saw was the gleam of Hrothgar's armor, a stark contrast against the chaos they'd left behind. As the warriors vanished, the temple grew silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the crew. The Guardians had retreated, their threat contained, at least for the moment. "Well," Vexen said, turning to his team with a weary smile, "I'd call that a win, or at least not a total loss." Sparks snorted, holstering his weapon. "I'll take it. Beats being a footnote in some alien history book." "Assuming they even bother with history," Drax added, his voice a mix of relief and sarcasm. With the immediate threat gone, the crew gathered their wits, the adrenaline fading but leaving them sharper, more resolved. They'd faced time-displaced warriors, alien guardians, and a temperamental rift, and come out the other side, if not victorious, at least alive. "All right, let's not stick around for an encore," Vexen said, leading the way out of the temple. "We've got a universe to fix and a lot of explaining to do. And a hell of a story to tell," Jinx added, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of survival. "Yeah," Vexen agreed, looking back at the temple, now silent and imposing. "We've earned ourselves a drink, or 10. And with that, they left the ancient structure behind, stepping into the harsh sunlight with a new sense of purpose. The universe was still a mess, and they had a long way to go, but for now, they'd bought themselves a little more time to figure it all out. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The ancient warriors, led by Chieftain Aeric, stood gawking like a bunch of toddlers seeing fireworks for the first time. Their wide eyes darted around, trying to make sense of the blinking lights and humming machinery. Aeric scratched his head, his iron helmet looking like a relic from a time when swords were the height of technology, which for him they were. "By the gods," Aeric muttered, squinting at a flickering console as if it might bite. What manner of sorcery is this? Captain Vexen stifled a laugh. Sorcery? Nah, mate, just good old-fashioned tech nightmares. You get used to it. Or you don't, and it kills you anyway. Aeric grunted, as if unimpressed by Vexen's ability to make light of their impending doom. I am not accustomed to bending the knee to machines. Join the club, Drax grunted, leaning against a wall that looked like it wanted to electrocute him. We've got jackets, but they are in the wash. Jinx sauntered over to Aeric, eyeing his armor with amused curiosity. Nice duds. I bet you it's hell at airport security. Aeric glanced at her, confused. Airport. Never mind, she said. Just remember, if it lights up and beeps, it's either about to explode or it's making coffee. There's really no in-between. Meanwhile, Sparks was in a corner of the temple, poking at the alien tech like it owed him money. His fingers danced across the controls with the grace of a bricklayer doing ballet, each beep and squawk of the machine making him wince. This place is a nightmare, Sparks muttered, casting a wary eye at a console that looked suspiciously like it might sprout legs and walk off. Whole lotta what the hell in one room. Bones was nearby, holding a scanner that beeped with a frequency slightly less annoying than a mosquito in your ear. He looked up, shaking his head as if he just diagnosed them all with terminal stupidity. The wormhole's getting worse, he said, more unstable than a politician's promise. Great, Vexen said, rolling his eyes. Just what we need, a cosmic blender about to go off. The warriors were still trying to get their bearings, casting furtive glances at the alien tech as if expecting it to start chanting in Latin. Aeric's men shuffled their feet, looking less like hardened warriors and more like kids on a school trip to a nuclear power plant. Do these sorceries bring more foes? Aeric asked, eyeing the machinery with suspicion and a hint of fear. Possibly, Vexen replied, not bothering to sugarcoat it. But look on the bright side. At least everything else will be a surprise. Aeric nodded, clearly not comforted. Surprise battles are seldom won. Tell me about it, Drax said, scratching his stubbled chin. We're basically riding on luck and caffeine out here. As if to punctuate his point, the wormhole pulsed again, sending a ripple through the temple that made it feel like they were standing in the belly of a very annoyed beast. The energy emanating from the rift was growing more erratic, like a drunk trying to conduct an orchestra. Hold on to something, Sparks yelled, bracing himself against a console that looked like it had been designed just to make failure more interesting. The warriors did as told, though more out of instinct than understanding. Their hands clutched at anything that seemed solid, their eyes wide with the kind of fear that only comes when you're out of your depth and realize you left your floaters at home. Vexen took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of panic that was his constant companion these days. Okay, team, we need to stabilize that rift before it spits out more surprises. Preferably ones that don't have axes, Jinx added, checking her weapon with a casualness that belied the adrenaline rushing through her veins. Or teeth, Drax said, his weapon ready, eyes scanning for any sign of incoming doom. Bones was already at the controls, his fingers moving with a speed that suggested he either knew exactly what he was doing or had finally snapped. I'll see what I can do, he said, voice tight with concentration. Aeric watched with wary fascination, his warriors gathering around him like a bunch of lost puppies looking for guidance. Is this truly the way of things in your space? Pretty much, Vexen replied, shrugging with the nonchalance of a man who'd long since given up on trying to understand the universe's sense of humor. One day you're the hunter, the next you're the surprise in tree. Aeric's face was a mix of disbelief and grudging respect. A challenging life, he said, almost admiringly. Yeah, Drax cut in. Keeps the boredom away. Along with any sense of security. The temple around them continued its light show, the alien technology responding to Bones' ministrations with all the enthusiasm of a teenager at a family reunion. The rift itself seemed to calm slightly, its previous chaotic rhythm replaced by a more subdued, but still ominous, glow. There, I've given us a bit more time, Bones said, stepping back from the controls with a sigh of relief that could have deflated a blimp. But it won't last forever. Nothing ever does, Vexen replied, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen too many things end. So, Aeric, what's the plan once we shove you and your boys back through time? Aeric considered this, rubbing his beard with a hand that had seen more battles than birthdays. We shall return to our lands to defend against the true enemies. We just hope it's not us next time, Jinx said, smirking. The warriors, despite themselves, shared a rough chuckle. It was the kind of laughter that spoke of shared danger and the uneasy alliance that had formed between them and the crew. The crew and their time-displaced allies stood in a moment of uncertain peace, the temple around them quiet now save for the low hum of the rift. It was a false calm, the kind that made you think, just for a second, that maybe, just maybe, everything would turn out okay. So, Sparks said, breaking the silence with a grin that was more sardonic than cheerful, anyone got a plan that doesn't involve us getting blown to hell and back? Vexen snorted. Survive. Everything else is optional. Drax nodded, his expression the resigned acceptance of a man who'd long since stopped expecting the universe to play fair. I'll take Plan A. Bones shook his head, the scanner in his hand casting its own skeptical eye over the proceedings. Better than nothing. The warriors, having heard enough of this strange banter to last a lifetime, looked to Aeric for guidance. The chieftain nodded, a silent promise that they'd see their homes again, no matter how far-fetched that seemed. With a deep breath, Vexen turned back to the controls. All right, let's see if we can make this magic trick work. The crew and the warriors watched as Bones and Vexen worked the console, their movements a dance between chaos and control, the steady hum of the rift a constant reminder of the stakes. Aeric stepped forward, his presence a tangible force even amidst the uncertainty. We stand ready, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of leadership and the silent promise of a warrior's honor. Good, Vexen replied, not looking up from the controls. Because we're about to find out if we've got what it takes to send you home. Jinx, standing at the ready, nudged Drax with a grin. Think we'll hit the jackpot, Drax snorted. With our luck. We'll find out it's rigged, Sparks chuckled, his expression one of resigned amusement. At least it'll be entertaining. With the warriors and crew united in purpose, Vexen took a deep breath and initiated the process to stabilize the wormhole. The room filled with a low vibration, a sound that spoke of the universe shifting in ways it wasn't meant to. The warriors, their weapons ready, looked to Aeric for a sign. The chieftain nodded, his expression a mix of determination and acceptance. Whatever happened next, they'd face it together. The rift pulsed, the colors swirling with a chaotic beauty that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The energy built to a crescendo, the room filled with a light that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Hold onto your hats, Vexen muttered, bracing himself for the inevitable. With a final surge, the rift stabilized, its energies aligning in a way that suggested, at least for the moment, that the universe had decided to play nice. Now or never, Bones said, stepping back from the controls with a nod to Vexen. Aeric and his men needed no further prompting. With a final nod to their unlikely allies, they stepped into the rift, their forms swallowed by the temporal vortex. The last thing Vexen saw was the gleam of Aeric's armor, a final flash of defiance against the chaos they'd faced together. As the warriors vanished, the temple grew silent, the only sound the ragged breathing of the crew. The Guardians had retreated, their threat contained, at least for the moment. Vexen turned to his team, a weary smile on his face. Well, looks like we did it. Or something close to it. Sparks let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. And here I was getting used to being cosmic jam. Still could be, Drax added, his voice a mix of sarcasm and relief. With the immediate threat gone, the crew gathered their wits, the adrenaline fading but leaving them sharper, more resolved. They'd faced time-displaced warriors, alien guardians, and a temperamental rift, and come out the other side, if not victorious, at least alive. All right, Vexen said, leading the way out of the temple. Let's not stick around for an encore. We've got a universe to fix and a lot of explaining to do. And a hell of a story to tell. Jinx added, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of survival. Yeah, Vexen agreed, looking back at the temple, now silent and imposing. We've earned ourselves a drink, or 10. And with that, they left the ancient structure behind, stepping into the harsh sunlight with a new sense of purpose. The universe was still a mess, and they had a long way to go, but for now, they'd bought themselves a little more time to figure it all out. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The universe had a peculiar sense of humor, which was to say, it was sadistic and enjoyed a good cosmic joke at the expense of its inhabitants. As Vexen and his ragtag crew stepped out of the temple, the alien sun glaring down at them like a judgmental parent, they couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to become the punchline once again. The temple behind them was silent now, but the air was alive with the unsettling hum of a reality that was decidedly not in its right mind. Temporal anomalies were popping up like unwanted relatives at a family gathering, each one offering a new brand of chaos to the already delightful smorgasbord of doom and confusion. Well, isn't this just peachy? Sparks grumbled, glancing at the horizon where a new anomaly twisted the sky into something that looked like a cubist's fever dream. I always wanted to see what it would be like to live in a Salvador Dali painting. Thank the universe for small favors, Drax replied, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Who needs sanity when you've got an express ticket to a mental breakdown? Vexen stared at the horizon, his mind working in overdrive to come up with a plan that wouldn't end with them as interstellar roadkill. The wormhole was still a raging beast that needed taming, and now, the alien caste system was on the verge of imploding. The lower castes had begun to murmur, whispers of dissent carried on the wind like an inconvenient truth at a politician's press conference. How are the locals taking the reality meltdown? Vexen asked, turning to Bones, who was fiddling with his ever-present scanner. Like a fish takes to dessert, Bones replied, squinting at the readouts. The lower castes are starting to question why they're the ones always getting squashed by the cosmic foot. Funny how near-death experiences tend to make people reevaluate their life choices. Can't blame them, Jinx said, leaning against a rock with the casual air of someone who'd already decided she was going to die laughing, if at all. If I got told my job was to jump into the abyss every time the universe gets a hangover, I'd start asking for hazard pay too. Vexen let out a breath. We need to stabilize that wormhole before their society tears itself apart, or worse, drags us down with it. Any bright ideas on how? Sparks asked, crossing his arms. Preferably one that doesn't get us all killed. I'm kind of attached to breathing. Vexen scratched his chin, eyes narrowing in thought. We convinced the alien leaders to help us. They've got to realize that maintaining the status quo isn't an option when reality itself is falling apart. Sure, Drax said, his tone a perfect blend of skepticism and humor. Because convincing a bunch of stuck-up alien aristocrats to change their ways is going to be a walk in the park. Jinx chuckled darkly. Hey, maybe we can tell them it's a new trend. Everybody's doing it, even the cool kids. The crew shared a grim laugh, the kind that only comes when you're knee-deep in the kind of mess that would make a space janitor retire on the spot. They suited up, the familiar ritual giving them a semblance of control in a world that seemed hell-bent on denying them even that. We need to get an audience with their leaders, Vexen said finally, his voice carrying the weight of inevitability, and convince them to see reason. Or at least a reasonable facsimile, Sparks quipped. Something that looks like reason if you squint really hard. As the crew made their way toward the alien settlement, Vexen couldn't shake the feeling that they were marching into a lion's den with nothing but a toothpick for protection. The aliens had never been particularly forthcoming with their intentions, and now, with their society on the brink of upheaval, they were likely to be even less cooperative. As they approached the settlement, a mix of Gothic architecture and alien biotech that looked like someone had tried to make a fortress out of nightmares and gelatin, they were met by a group of alien warriors. Their armor gleamed in the sunlight, A reminder that while temporal chaos might make philosophers of some, others preferred to stick to the old-fashioned ways of solving problems with pointy things. One of the warriors stepped forward, his expression as welcoming as a tax audit. "State your business," he said, his voice carrying the subtle undertone that suggested they'd better make it good. Vexen stepped up, channeling his inner diplomat, which, in truth, was a bit like asking a butcher to perform brain surgery. "We need to speak with your leaders," he said, making sure his voice was as steady as his nerves would allow. "About the anomalies and the wormhole." The warrior's eyes narrowed. "And why should they listen to you?" "Because the universe is turning into the universe's own version of a dumpster fire," Drax interjected, his tone as dry as the alien desert around them. "And unless they want to be charbroiled along with the rest of us, they might want to help put it out." The warrior studied them for a long moment, the kind of contemplative silence that made you wonder if you were about to get shot or invited to tea. Finally, he nodded, albeit reluctantly. "Follow me." As they were led through the settlement, the tension was palpable, the air crackling with the kind of anticipation that usually preceded either a great revelation or a catastrophic mistake. Vexen couldn't help but notice the glances from the lower castes, their eyes filled with a mix of hope and desperation, as if looking to the newcomers for an answer they themselves couldn't find. The audience chamber was as grand as it was intimidating, the high ceilings and sweeping architecture designed to remind those within of their insignificance, a monument to the status quo that now seemed as fragile as a spider's web in a hurricane. The alien leaders, seated on thrones that looked more like sculptures of agony than chairs, regarded the crew with expressions that ranged from disdain to mild curiosity. Vexen cleared his throat, a cough to remind himself that he still had a voice and should probably use it before someone did something regrettable. "We need your help to stabilize the wormhole," he said, cutting to the chase. "The anomalies are causing chaos, and it's only a matter of time before your society follows suit." One of the leaders, a creature with an air of withered dignity, leaned forward. "And why should we aid you, outsiders? You are not of our people. Because if we don't fix this, there won't be any people left to decide who belongs where," Sparks said, his patience as thin as his smile. "Besides, we're not exactly thrilled about the idea of being stuck here either." Another leader, who seemed to have taken fashion tips from a particularly enthusiastic chandelier, spoke up. "Your presence is the catalyst for this turmoil." "Sure," Jinx said, crossing her arms. "Blame the new kids. Never mind the fact that your precious wormhole is acting like it's got a mind of its own." The leaders conferred in hushed tones, their language a mix of clicks and hisses that made Vexen think of snakes arguing over a particularly juicy mouse. Finally, the first leader spoke again. "If we agree to assist you, what do you propose?" Vexen took a deep breath, the moment of truth looming like an executioner's axe. "We need to recalibrate the wormhole's energy outputs. Use your technology to synchronize it with our own and prevent further anomalies." "And what guarantee do we have that this will succeed?" Drax shrugged. "Look, there are no guarantees, all right. This is space, not a bloody insurance policy. But doing nothing's a surefire way to end up on the wrong end of a cosmic blender." The leader's eyes flicked between the crew, measuring their resolve, their desperation. Finally, the lead alien nodded. "Very well. We shall assist you." Relief washed over the crew like a cool breeze on a sweltering day. It wasn't victory, but it was a start. A chance to stop the universe from folding them into its next disaster. "Thank you," Vexen said, his voice carrying the gratitude of someone who'd just been handed a lifeline in a stormy sea. "Don't thank us yet," Sparks muttered under his breath. "We still have to pull this off." The team spent the next few hours immersed in a chaotic blend of alien tech and human ingenuity, the kind of collaboration that usually only happened in children's cartoons or particularly optimistic sci-fi novels. Vexen and Bones worked the controls, while Drax and Sparks coordinated with the aliens, their efforts a symphony of madness and hope. "How's it looking?" Jinx asked, glancing over to where Bones was making adjustments that might as well have been sorcery for all she understood. "We've got a shot," Bones replied, his eyes glued to the scanner. "With their tech bolstering IORs, we can stabilize the wormhole long enough to shut down the anomalies. Let's hope the universe decides to cut us a break," Drax said. For once, they worked feverishly, the tension building with every passing moment. The anomalies outside were growing more erratic, a reminder that their margin for error was shrinking faster than an optimist's lifespan in the grimdark verse. Finally, Vexen stepped back from the console, his expression grim but determined. "All right, let's do this." The alien leaders had gathered to watch, their stoic faces betraying nothing of what they thought about this strange alliance. Their society might have been on the brink, but for now, they were united in the face of a common enemy, an indifferent universe. As the process began, the room filled with a low hum, a vibration that seemed to resonate with the very bones of the world. The crew held their breaths, every nerve on edge as they watched the readouts, praying to whatever gods might be listening, and a few that probably weren't. "Come on," Sparks muttered. "Just this once." The readings began to stabilize, the chaotic energy of the wormhole aligning in a way that suggested they might actually have a shot at pulling this off. "We're almost there," Bones said, his voice a cocktail of relief and disbelief. As the wormhole's energies synchronized, the first signs of stabilization appeared, the anomalies outside starting to dissipate like smoke on the wind. Vexen let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, a small smile tugging at his lips. "Looks like the universe decided to play nice," he said, his tone a mix of humor and exhaustion. "Or it's just saving the final twist for later," Jinx quipped, but her grin belied the relief they all felt. With the immediate crisis averted, they turned to the alien leaders, who watched with a mixture of awe and something that almost resembled respect. "Your assistance has been invaluable," the lead alien said, his voice carrying a note of sincerity that felt as rare as a peaceful day in their line of work. Vexen nodded, the acknowledgement a small victory in itself. "We're not out of the woods yet, but it's a start." As they made their way back through the settlement, the tension in the air seemed to have lifted, the murmurs of dissent replaced by a cautious optimism. The lower castes watched them pass, their eyes now filled with a glimmer of hope where before there had been only despair. "Think they'll remember us fondly?" Drax asked, his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. "Depends," Sparks replied. "If we solve this, we're heroes. If not, we're just a weird footnote in their history books." As they headed back toward the ship, the crew shared a moment of quiet camaraderie, the kind that came from facing down the universe's worst and somehow coming out the other side. "All right, team," Vexen said, his voice carrying the weight of leadership tempered with a touch of humor. "Let's get back to the ship and figure out our next move. The universe isn't going to save itself. And we're not getting paid by the IOR," Jinx added with a smirk. With the sun setting behind them, casting long shadows over the alien landscape, the crew headed back to their ship with a renewed sense of purpose. The universe was still a mess, but for now, they had a fighting chance to set things right. And that was more than they'd started with. The glow from the wormhole stabilized for a brief, glorious moment. Vexen allowed himself a rare smile, the sort that hinted at a man who had finally found a coffee shop open at 3 a.m. But of course, the universe wasn't about to let anyone have nice things. The smile barely had time to settle before the console erupted in a cacophony of alarms that sounded suspiciously like a band of drunk robots playing death metal. "Oh, for the love of," Sparks began, but was cut off as the lights flickered and died. The room plunged into darkness, broken only by the flickering of the alien tech, which seemed to be having a meltdown of its own. "What the hell just happened?" Drax's voice was a low growl, the kind that suggested something was about to get punched, regardless of whether it was sentient. Bones squinted at his scanner, though it was about as useful as a chocolate teapot at this point. "The wormholes collapsed," he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and the resignation of someone who just realized they'd been sold a faulty parachute. Jinx let out a laugh, sharp and bitter. Well, that's just bloody perfect. So much for the universe playing nice. Vexen rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of 1,000 bad decisions pressing down on him. Okay, plan B, which is? Jinx asked. Panic slightly less than everyone else, Vexen replied curtly. And try not to die. The alien leaders, previously so dignified on their agony thrones, were now engulfed in a mixture of panic and outrage. Their society, already teetering on the edge, was now in full-blown crisis mode. It was as if someone had pulled the strings on a marionette show and let them tangle themselves into chaos. "No one panic," shouted King Hrothgar, his voice carrying over the din. "Okay, maybe a little panic if we can't stabilize the wormhole. It's going to tear reality apart out there," Bones said, his voice as grim as the situation deserved. "The anomalies will keep getting worse. Think of it this way," Jinx offered. "If reality breaks, at least we won't have to deal with taxes anymore." Outside, the world had taken on a distinctly apocalyptic air. The sky twisted into unnatural shapes, a kaleidoscope of disaster that even the most optimistic of artists would struggle to capture without going mad. "We need to get back to the ship," Vexen said, striding toward the exit like a man determined to face his doom head-on, or at least get a good seat for it. "And then what?" Sparks asked, falling into step beside him with the air of a man who had long since stopped hoping for a coherent plan and was now just riding the chaos like a particularly uncomfortable roller coaster. "We improvise," Vexen replied. "Like we always do." As they rushed through the settlement, the once despondent lower castes now buzzed with a frenetic energy. Faces that had been blank with hopelessness were now animated with fear and a strange sort of anticipation. After all, nothing like a good apocalypse to make you feel alive. "We're all gonna die, aren't we?" one of the lower caste members shouted as they ran past. "Not if I can help it," Vexen shouted back, and for once he almost believed it. Drax took a moment to look around, his eyes narrowing as he took in the chaos. "You know, I'm starting to think the universe has it in for us specifically." "The universe can get in line," Jinx said as they reached the ship. "I've got a few choice words for it myself." The ship stood waiting, an island of sanity in a sea of madness. The crew piled in, slamming the hatch behind them with the finality of someone who'd just decided that maybe the outside world wasn't worth the trouble after all. "Okay, let's see what we've got," Vexen said, sliding into the captain's chair with the grace of a man who just sat on a particularly uncomfortable cactus. The console flickered to life, displaying the kind of error messages that suggested it had skipped right past panic and was now in full-blown existential crisis mode. "Everything's fried," Sparks reported, his fingers dancing over the controls with a resigned determination. "We're not going anywhere until we get this fixed." "Fantastic," Drax muttered, crossing his arms. "Stranded on a planet where the sky's trying to eat us, surrounded by aliens who might decide we're more trouble than we're worth." "Don't worry," Jinx said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I'm sure we'll be fine. We've got that whole human adaptability thing going for us, right?" Vexen smirked despite himself. "That or we'll die spectacularly. Either way, I'm sure it'll be one hell of a show." Bones was hunched over the scanner, trying to make sense of the data as if it were a particularly difficult crossword puzzle. "The wormhole's energy levels are fluctuating. If we can harness some of that, we might be able to jumpstart our systems." "Right," Vexen replied, his mind racing. "So all we have to do is figure out how to harness chaotic energy from a collapsing wormhole. Piece of cake." "Cake's usually not on fire, Captain," Sparks reminded him, adjusting a few dials and staring intently at the readings he was getting. "I might be able to rig something up, but no promises it won't blow us to hell." "Well, that's comforting," Drax said dryly. "I always wanted to be a human firework." Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The settlement was in uproar, the lower castes clashing with their superiors, the air filled with the sound of shouted orders and rising panic. It was the kind of situation that usually ended with someone on top of a barricade making a stirring speech about freedom or, more likely, an impromptu coup. Vexen turned to the crew and the handful of alien allies who had followed them back to the ship, a motley collection of warriors and tech-savvy types who looked like they had just realized they'd signed up for the wrong team-building retreat. "Okay," he said, raising his voice to be heard over the din outside. "Here's the plan. Sparks, Bones, get to work on siphoning energy from the wormhole. Jinx, Drax, you're on defense. Make sure nothing gets through that door." "And what about you?" Drax asked, arching an eyebrow. Vexen grinned, a sharp, predatory thing that suggested he was either about to do something very clever or very stupid. "I'll be on crowd control." With that, he was out the door, heading straight into the maelstrom of chaos. The settlement was teetering on the brink, its fragile order collapsing under the weight of its own desperation. "Listen up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the clamor like a knife through particularly stubborn butter. "We're all in this mess together. If we want to get out of it, we've got to work together." A few of the lower castes paused, their attention caught by the sheer audacity of a stranger telling them what to do in their own home. "Why should we listen to you?" one of them shouted back, and Vexen could feel the hostility like a tangible thing, a beast with bared teeth ready to pounce. "Because I'm the only one here who actually has a plan," Vexen shot back, his tone as sharp as a winter wind. "And because, like it or not, your leaders are just as screwed as the rest of us if we can't fix this." The murmurs of agreement were faint, but they were there, a flicker of hope in the darkness. Vexen seized on it, pushing forward with the kind of reckless determination that had seen him through more than one impossible situation in the past. "Look, I know you didn't sign up for this," he continued. "Neither did we. But if we work together, we might just live to see another day." More of them were listening now, their eyes wary but attentive. It wasn't exactly a rousing call to arms, but it would do. Besides, Vexen had never been much for speeches. He preferred actions, the kind that left a mark on the universe, even if the universe was doing its best to pretend it didn't notice. Back on the ship, Sparks and Bones were doing their best impression of miracle workers, their hands moving with the frenetic energy of men who knew they were on borrowed time. "Almost got it," Sparks shouted, his voice tight with concentration. "Just a little more." Bones glanced at him, the barest hint of a smile playing across his lips. "We're either about to be legends or very dead. Not mutually exclusive," Sparks replied, his eyes never leaving the console. Outside, Vexen was doing his best to keep the uneasy truce from dissolving into chaos. The alien warriors, led by King Hrothgar, had joined forces with the humans, their armor gleaming dully in the dim light, a reminder of the traditions they clung to even as their world fell apart. "We need to hold this position," Hrothgar bellowed, his voice a rallying cry for those looking for a reason to stand firm. "Let none pass who would do us harm." Aeric, the chieftain who had once looked upon technology with suspicion, was now working side by side with Bones, his brow furrowed in concentration as he tried to understand the strange devices. "I never thought I'd see the day I'd rely on these cursed machines," he muttered. "Neither did I," Bones replied, adjusting the settings with the precision of a surgeon. "But here we are." The ground trembled, a reminder of the unstable forces at play, the anomalies outside growing with each passing moment. It was a race against time, and everyone knew it. "Here goes nothing," Sparks said, flipping the final switch with the grim determination of a man who'd just posted a very controversial opinion on the internet. The ship roared to life, its systems flaring with borrowed energy, the console settling into a steady hum that suggested they might just have a chance. "Did it work?" Jinx asked, peering over Sparks' shoulder with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "We'll find out soon enough," Sparks replied, his voice steady despite the madness swirling around them. Vexen rejoined the group, his expression one of cautious optimism. We've got power. Let's see what we can do with it. Outside, the skies were still a mess, the anomalies a testament to the universe's displeasure with their meddling. But for now, they had a ship, a crew, and a plan. "All right, folks," Vexen said, his voice carrying the weight of leadership and the grim humor that had carried them through this far. "Let's show this wormhole what humans are made of, and if it doesn't like it," Drax asked, his tone as dry as ever. "Then we'll give it indigestion," Vexen replied, a wry grin playing across his lips. With that, they set to work, the crew moving with the kind of efficiency that only came from knowing that each action could be their last. It was a race against time, against the universe itself, and for once, they weren't about to back down. The next few hours passed in a blur of frenetic activity, the crew and their unlikely allies working side by side in a desperate bid to stabilize the wormhole. The air was thick with tension, each moment stretching into eternity as they worked against the clock. "Almost there," Bones said, his voice a low murmur as he made the final adjustments. The wormhole flickered, its energy levels stabilizing for a brief, tantalizing moment before plunging back into chaos. "Damn it," Sparks cursed, slamming a fist into the console in frustration. "We need more power. Keep at it," Vexen urged, his voice steady despite the mounting pressure. "We're not done yet." The alien warriors stood watch, their eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the anomalies. It was a tense standoff, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos, there was strength to be found in unity. "Come on, you fickle bastard," Jinx whispered, her gaze fixed on the readouts. "Just give us this one." Finally, with a shuddering groan, the wormhole's energy levels began to stabilize, the anomalies outside gradually dissipating like mist before the sun. "We did it," Bones said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and triumph. "Damn right we did," Vexen replied, his grin as fierce as it was fleeting. With the immediate crisis averted, the crew allowed themselves a moment of quiet celebration, the kind that came from knowing they had faced the worst and come out the other side. But even as they savored their victory, they knew the "we might have done it," Vexen said, letting the words hang in the air like a particularly noxious fart, daring anyone to dispute him. Sparks and Bones exchanged glances that seemed to say, "Can you believe we actually pulled this off?" The atmosphere inside the ship was a mix of elation and disbelief, the tension not entirely gone, but somehow more bearable, like a hangover that's given way to a comforting, numbing sensation. Outside, the alien warriors and humans stood together, a makeshift army that had somehow managed to fend off temporal destruction with duct tape and sheer bloody-mindedness. "Drax, I want a status report," Vexen barked, his voice cutting through the air like a rusty knife. He had that look in his eye, the one that suggested he was already thinking of the next disaster, like a man who's never happy unless he's got a problem to solve. Drax, ever the gruff pragmatist, adjusted his helmet communicator, ignoring the buzzing static like it was an old friend. "Shields are holding." "Can't say the same for my patience," he grumbled, looking over at the aliens who were trying to grasp this strange alliance like it was a slippery eel. Jinx, always one for gallows humor, leaned against the ship's hull with arms crossed. "So what's next, Captain? We get matching uniforms and start a band." Her eyes twinkled with mischief, but the underlying tension was as palpable as ever. "We're not out of the woods yet," Vexen replied, which was an understatement, considering the universe was still very much intent on tearing itself a new one. "But we've got a fighting chance, and that's more than we had a few hours ago." King Hrothgar, who looked as if he'd just seen a dog play the saxophone, approached Vexen with a mixture of awe and skepticism. "You humans are resourceful," he admitted, the words sounding like they'd been pulled from him with a crowbar. "Yeah, we specialize in pulling miracles out of our arse," Vexen replied, his tone matter-of-fact, as if he were discussing the weather and not the collapse of reality. Aoric, the reluctant technophile, was still busy fiddling with one of the consoles, his expression a study in concentration. "These machines." "They are magic," he muttered, half to himself, which was saying something from a chieftain who probably considered fire a high-tech innovation. Bones, overhearing, chuckled dryly. "Magic science. Just depends on how hungover you are when you're looking at it," he quipped, tapping a few buttons like he was playing a particularly frustrating game of pinball. Outside, the anomalies continued their dance along the horizon, but their intensity had diminished, like a storm that had exhausted itself throwing a tantrum. Still, no one was under any illusions. This was a temporary reprieve, like a ceasefire in an eternal war. "All right, people," Vexen called, capturing the attention of everyone within earshot. "We've got some breathing room. Let's not waste it. Sparks, you and Jinx work on the comms. Bones, see if you can patch into more of that alien tech. We need to understand what we're dealing with." "And what about me?" Drax asked, crossing his arms and adopting a stance that suggested he'd rather punch a hole in the universe than sit idle. "You, my friend, get to babysit our new allies here," Vexen replied with a grin that suggested he was enjoying this far too much. Drax shot him a look that could have peeled paint. "If I'd known babysitting was part of the job, I'd have brought my rattles and pacifiers." "Think of it as a cultural exchange," Vexen said with a shrug. "You show them how to growl menacingly. They show you how to stab someone from 50 paces. "Great," Drax muttered. "Always wanted a crash course in medieval shanking." As the crew scattered to their tasks, the settlement began to resemble something bordering on order rather than the chaos it had been. The lower castes, once on the brink of revolt, were now looking to the humans with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. Or maybe they were just wondering how humans managed to look so pale and sweaty all the time. Amidst this, King Hrothgar began to rally his warriors with a speech that sounded like a mix of ancient prophecy and modern motivational hype, trying to instill some semblance of morale into his troops. Aeric, meanwhile, was tentatively poking at the various ship controls, as if afraid they might bite. "Careful with that," Bones warned, gesturing to a blinking light that was definitely more Explode-Y than Coffee-Y. "That's not the kind of button you press unless you want a new haircut." "These devices, they could change everything," Aeric replied, his tone a mix of wonder and fear. "Change isn't always a bad thing," Bones said, with the air of someone who'd seen more than his share of both the good and the catastrophically bad. "Sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you moving." The hours ticked by, a slow march of progress punctuated by the occasional misstep or near catastrophe. Jinx and Sparks worked on the comms, their banter a mix of technical jargon and sarcasm sharp enough to shave with. "If we can get the long range working, we might be able to call for backup," Jinx said, squinting at the damaged console like it owed her money. "Backup," Sparks replied with a snort. "With our luck, the only thing listening will be a cosmic void with a hangover." "Wouldn't be the first time we shouted into the void and hoped for an echo," Jinx countered, her fingers flying over the keys with practiced ease. Meanwhile, Vexen kept a watchful eye on everything, his mind a whirl of strategies and contingencies. The wormhole might be stable for now, but it was a tenuous stability, like a truce between two heavily armed lunatics. "Captain, we've got something," Jinx called out, her voice tinged with excitement and something else. Hope, maybe, but Vexen wasn't one to jump to conclusions. "What is it?" he asked, moving over to the console where Sparks and Jinx were huddled. "A signal," Sparks replied, his tone incredulous. "It's faint, but it's definitely out there." Vexen's eyes narrowed, not out of suspicion, but out of a grim sort of determination. "Let's see if we can talk to whoever's on the other end." As the connection crackled into life, the static slowly giving way to a voice that was garbled but unmistakably human, Vexen felt a mix of relief and apprehension wash over him. "This is Captain Vexen of the Far Horizon," he said, his voice steady and commanding. "We need assistance. We've got a situation here that's above our pay grade." There was a pause, the kind that stretched on a second too long and made you wonder if the universe was about to drop another cosmic anvil on your head. "This is the Galactic Union vessel Ascendant," came the reply, the voice clear but edged with urgency. "We've received your signal." "What's your status?" Vexen took a deep breath, allowing himself a moment to savor the fact that they might actually have a lifeline. "We've managed to stabilize a local wormhole, but it's temporary. We need extraction and containment support." "Understood. We're deploying a team to your coordinates. Hold tight." As the signal cut off, Vexen allowed himself a rare smile, one that was almost genuine. It was a moment of relief, the kind that comes when you realize you're not quite as alone as you thought. "Looks like we might live to see another day," Jinx said, her voice light but her expression serious. "Yeah," Vexen replied, his mind already turning to the next challenge. "And maybe, just maybe, the universe will give us a break." "Not bloody likely," Sparks muttered, but there was a touch of warmth in his voice, a camaraderie born of shared struggle. As the minutes ticked by, the crew made final preparations, securing the ship and readying their makeshift defenses, just in case the anomalies decided to make one last hurrah. The warriors and humans continued their uneasy alliance, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most unlikely allies can make the difference. When the Union vessel finally appeared, descending through the sky with a grace that seemed almost alien, there was a collective exhale from everyone on the ground. It was a moment of quiet triumph, a reminder that even in the darkest times, light can pierce the shadows. The extraction went smoothly, a rare occurrence in their line of work, but one they were more than willing to accept. As the crew of the Far Horizon boarded the Union vessel, there was a sense of weary satisfaction, the kind that comes from knowing you fought the good fight, and for now, at least, come out on top. As they settled in, Vexen took a moment to look back at the settlement, at the horizon where the anomalies had once threatened to tear reality apart. There was still a long road ahead, but for now they had each other, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough. "Here's to whatever comes next," Vexen said, raising an imaginary glass to his crew. "And to surviving it." "Cheers to that," Drax replied, a rare smile breaking through his usual gruff exterior. As the ship ascended, leaving the chaos behind, there was a sense of hope, tempered by the knowledge that there were always new challenges on the horizon. But for now, they'd earned a respite, however brief, and that was enough. Because in this universe, sometimes surviving is the greatest victory of all. The wormhole glared at them like an angry cosmic eye, daring anyone foolish enough to try and poke it back into submission. Captain Vexen stood with Aoric at the edge of the gaping maw, the two of them looking like the universe's weirdest buddy cop duo. Vexen, the seasoned space captain, weathered and sarcastic, and Aoric, the chieftain with a fascination for buttons and things that go beep. "Well, Aoric," Vexen said, eyeing the swirling chaos with the kind of grim determination one reserves for tax audits and root canals. "You ever do anything insanely stupid?" Aoric nodded, his eyes wide as saucers, glancing between the wormhole and the blinking lights that reminded him of an over-enthusiastic festival back home. "Once tried to milk a Vebex." "That didn't end well," Vexen chuckled, his humor as dark as the void surrounding them. "This'll be like that, but with a lot more screaming if we mess up." Drax, standing nearby with a scowl that could melt steel, grunted, "And less milk." "Right," Vexen continued, undeterred. "Our job is to dive in there, slap a cosmic band-aid on that rift, and pray to every god that's listening we don't end up as space dust." "Sounds like a plan," Aoric replied, gripping a piece of alien tech like it was a particularly ornery snake. Bones wandered over, brandishing his scanner like a magic wand. "Scanner says it's stable enough for entry, but I wouldn't set my retirement funds on it." "Good thing I gamble with my life, not my money," Vexen retorted, his voice carrying the weight of someone who's seen too many things go boom. Jinx, sitting at the console with Sparks, piped up. "You sure about this, Captain?" "It's not exactly in the job description. Neither is dying horribly," Vexen shot back, though the edges of his mouth twitched upwards. "And if we pull this off, We can add saving reality to our resumes. Fine, Jinx said, her tone resigned but her expression laced with admiration. Just don't go getting yourself killed. I'd hate to have to update my LinkedIn saying my last boss got swallowed by a temporal anomaly. Noted, Vexen replied, clapping Aeric on the shoulder. Let's go do what we do best, be reckless idiots. Aeric asked, a smile breaking through his stoic features. Exactly. The two of them suited up, the weight of their mission hanging over them like an impending lawsuit. As they approached the wormhole, the air seemed to vibrate with anticipation, or maybe that was just their ship's failing engine. Ready? Vexen asked, his hand resting on the lever that would release them into the cosmic nightmare. Aeric nodded, gripping his console-playing device of choice, a hunk of tech that might as well have been conjured from a wizard's workshop for all he understood it. Let's fix this mess. On three, Vexen said, his voice steady even as the universe threatened to come unglued around them. 1, 2, 3, Aeric shouted, and they launched into the wormhole, their world dissolving into a kaleidoscope of light and noise that could make a festival look like a dull Sunday picnic. Inside, everything was chaos. Time stuttered, reality wobbled, and the only thing keeping them from turning into cosmic toast was sheer stubborn willpower. Keep your eyes on the prize. Vexen yelled over the din, his gaze fixed on the central rift that twisted and turned like a snake on a griddle. Aeric, surprisingly calm for a man in the middle of a temporal storm, muttered under his breath, pressing buttons with a fervor that suggested either divine intervention or blind luck. This button must do something. Better be the right something. Vexen shouted back, adjusting his own panel with fingers that moved like they had their own plan of action. The wormhole heaved around them, a roiling mass of time and space that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. It was the kind of place that could drive a man to drink if they survived long enough to reach the bar. Almost there. Vexen barked, his mind racing through a checklist of things that could go wrong, each one more creative than the last. Keep it together, I've got it, Aeric replied, as a jolt of energy surged through the contraption in his hands, the lights flaring like they'd just been given a shot of espresso. Now, Vexen said, slamming his hand on a panel like he was trying to squash a particularly resilient bug. The wormhole shuddered, reality hiccuped, and then blessedly, everything steadied. Did we do it? Aeric asked, glancing around with the dazed expression of a man who'd just survived his own funeral. Vexen checked his readouts, the numbers aligning in a way that suggested they hadn't just averted disaster, they'd actually managed to fix the damn thing. Looks like it. We're still here, aren't we? Well, I haven't spontaneously combusted, Aeric said, his voice equal parts relief and disbelief. So that's a start. Drax's voice crackled through the communicator, a welcome interruption in the ongoing symphony of chaos. You two still alive, or should I start planning the memorial service? Alive and kicking, Vexen replied, a grin spreading across his face that was as genuine as it was unexpected. Against all odds. Well, color me impressed. Didn't think you had it in you, Drax said, his tone suggesting he might just be a little proud. Get back here before the universe changes its mind. With the wormhole now a sedate swirl, the two made their way back, the journey feeling less like a sprint through hell and more like a casual stroll through a slightly dangerous garden. As they emerged, greeted by the anxious faces of their crew, Vexen couldn't help but feel a swell of satisfaction. They'd done it. They'd actually done it. Jinx gave him a thumbs up, her expression a mixture of pride and disbelief. You really stuck it to the universe, didn't you? Yeah, well, Vexen replied, his tone light but his heart heavy with gratitude. Sometimes you've got to show the universe who's boss. King Hrothgar approached, his demeanor as regal as ever, though there was a begrudging respect in his gaze. You have done what we could not. For that we owe you. Don't get all mushy, Vexen said, though there was warmth in his voice. We're all in this mess together, Aeric, shaking hands with Bones and Sparks, nodded. Guess I've got a few stories to take back home. Might leave out the part where I nearly wet myself, though. Bones laughed, a sound that resonated with the kind of camaraderie only shared by those who've faced death and come out the other side. A makes for a better tale. As the ship prepared to depart, their task complete, Vexen took a moment to look out at the horizon, now a tranquil sight rather than a foreboding specter. It wasn't often you got to say you'd helped patch up a tear in the fabric of space and time, and he intended to savor the moment. "Here's to whatever cosmic nonsense comes next," he said, raising an imaginary glass before heading back to his ship, "and to surviving it with all the grace of a drunken space rhinoceros." "Cheers to that," Drax replied, a rare grin breaking through his usual granite-like exterior. As the far horizon lifted off, leaving behind the remnants of chaos and the promise of a more stable future, there was a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere survival. They'd faced the worst the universe had to offer and lived to tell the tale. And that, in Vexen's book, was a victory worth celebrating. Back on board, with the engines humming reassuringly and the crew settling into their routines, Vexen let out a long breath. There was still a universe out there, still full of perils and pitfalls, but for now, they'd earned a moment of peace. As they soared through the void, leaving trails of stardust in their wake, Vexen allowed himself a rare moment of optimism. Because in this universe, where everything that could go wrong often did, sometimes snatching victory from the jaws of chaos was the best you could hope for. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The far horizon hummed contentedly as it drifted through the vast, indifferent void, like a cosmic cat that had just been fed. The crew, having narrowly avoided becoming a footnote in the annals of interstellar disaster, were still coming to terms with their unexpected success. Captain Vexen peered out at the now tranquil horizon, which seemed to have finally settled down for a nap after its tantrum. The wormhole, previously as stable as a cat on a caffeine high, now swirled with a sedate grace. It was almost disappointing, like watching a firework fizzle out before it got to the good part. "So, Vexen," Drax said, sidling up with all the subtlety of an avalanche. "Save the universe again next week. Why not? Put it on the calendar right between getting pestered by space pirates and that suspicious space broccoli incident," Vexen replied, his grin as lopsided as a drunk's tie at a wedding. Around them, the crew settled into the everyday chaos of a spaceship that, for once, wasn't on the edge of disintegration. Sparks and Bones were having a heated debate over some technical mumbo-jumbo that probably involved recalibrating the defibrillators or some such nonsense. Meanwhile, Jinx sat at her console, the adrenaline finally fading into a sense of smug satisfaction. "Never thought I'd see the day where we patch a hole in reality and live to tell the tale," Jinx mused, spinning her chair around to face Vexen. "I mean, I've seen you fix a leaky engine with chewing gum, but this is a new level." "Yeah, the universe should really stop letting us fix things," Vexen said, his voice dripping with faux seriousness. "Next thing you know, we'll be fixing diplomatic relations with duct tape." Bones chimed in with a chuckle. "I doubt even duct tape could hold the universe together sometimes." The alien chieftain Aeric, still wide-eyed at the gaggle of blinking lights and humming machinery, was quietly observing the crew. The whole affair seemed to have left him with a newfound appreciation for human ingenuity, or madness, depending on how you looked at it. "You humans," Aeric began, his voice a low rumble of awe and confusion. "You are more resilient than I imagined. Your technology, your resolve," says the guy who nearly dismantled a wormhole with sheer optimism and a shiny button, Vexen quipped, clapping Aeric on the back with a camaraderie born of shared insanity. Aeric chuckled, a sound like rocks tumbling down a hill. "Perhaps we have learned something from you. Our society has long been rigid. But perhaps it is time for change." And there it was, the silver lining in the cosmic storm cloud they just navigated. The aliens, with their caste systems and stoic traditions, were beginning to see the value in adaptability. Maybe, just maybe, they'd take a leaf out of the human book, preferably one that wasn't the chapter on reckless abandon. "It's like teaching an old dog new tricks," Drax said, arms crossed, his scowl replaced by something approaching approval. "Except the dog's an alien and the trick is not blowing up." "Let's not push our luck," Vexen replied, although he couldn't help but feel a twinge of hope that maybe their chaotic little venture had sparked something in the aliens. "We've already moved mountains, or in this case cosmic anomalies." King Hrothgar, towering and regal as ever, approached with a nod of acknowledgement. His usual stoic countenance betrayed a glimmer of what might even be gratitude. "Your actions have shown us the potential for change, Captain Vexen. Our society owes you a debt." "Don't start printing medals yet," Vexen said, waving off the praise with a casual ease. "We did it because we had no choice, and because we're just too damn stubborn to let the universe have the last laugh." Hrothgar chuckled, a sound like stones grinding together. "Stubbornness is a trait we can admire." "Well, if stubbornness were currency, I'd be the richest captain in the galaxy," Vexen replied, his smile infectious enough to spread through the crew like a particularly virulent strain of optimism. As the ship glided through space, the alien temple now a distant memory, the changes in the alien society were already beginning to take root. The once proud and immovable caste system seemed to be loosening its vice-like grip, inspired by the humans' irreverent approach to life, the universe, and everything they could get their hands on. "Aoric," Vexen said, catching the chieftain's eye. "What happens now?" "Now," Aoric echoed as if tasting the word. "Now we begin anew. We will take what we have learned from you and apply it to our own ways. Perhaps it is time for my people to embrace a little chaos." "Careful," Drax warned, though there was a hint of a smile in his eyes. "Once you let chaos in, it tends to make itself at home." The alien nodded, as if the concept of controlled chaos was something he could find a use for. "And perhaps it is time to let some chaos in. Change is the only constant, yes." "Yeah, that's what they keep telling us," Vexen said with a shrug. "Of course, they also said the universe was stable, and we know how that turned out." Back on the bridge, the crew was finally starting to relax, the tension draining away like water swirling down a drain. For once, the universe felt less like a looming threat and more like a place to be lived in, even if it was full of dangers and pitfalls waiting to trip them up. "Here's to us," Jinx said, raising an imaginary glass in a toast, "for being reckless, crazy, and just stupid enough to think we could fix a hole in space-time." Sparks joined in, his voice jovial. "And here's to not being vaporized in the process." Bones laughed, the sound bouncing around the bridge like a cheerful echo. "I'll drink to that." "If only we hadn't run out of the good stuff last week." Vexen leaned back in his chair, watching his crew with a sense of pride that was rare and raw. They'd been through hell together and come out the other side, bruised maybe, a little singed around the edges, but victorious. "So what's next, Captain?" Drax asked, ever the pragmatist, though even he couldn't mask the curiosity in his tone. "Next," Vexen pondered, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "Next we take a little break, let the universe miss us for a change, and then, who knows, there's a whole galaxy out there full of trouble, and you're not happy unless you're knee-deep in it, are you?" Drax said, shaking his head with a smirk. "Trouble's where the fun is, Drax," Vexen replied. "And besides, we've got a reputation to uphold. Can't let the universe think we've gone soft." As the crew settled back into the rhythm of life aboard the far horizon, the sense of camaraderie was palpable. They were more than just a crew now, they were a family, bound together by the shared insanity of their escapades. Out in the black, the stars continued to shine, indifferent to the dramas playing out beneath them. But for the far horizon and its crew, they'd carved out their own little corner of the universe, and for now, that was enough. As they drifted further into the void, leaving trails of stardust in their wake, Captain Vexen allowed himself one last look at the now stable wormhole, a reminder of the chaos they'd tamed and the future they'd helped shape. "Here's to the future," he murmured to himself, a private toast to the vastness that lay ahead. And so, with the ship humming like a contented beast, the crew of the far horizon sailed onward, ready to face whatever cosmic nonsense the universe threw their way next. Because in the end, it wasn't about the destination. It was about the journey and the ridiculous, hilarious, mind-bending ride along the way. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough, for now.